Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast. As part of the remarriage series, I have another special guest here on Zoom with me today. I'd like to introduce you to Chenoa Murphy. And Chenoa and I go a little ways back before my coaching days, really. So like early in my, I think divorce days, I think it was like right smack in the middle of my divorce when we met. We were both homeschoolers at the time, and we've become really good friends. Chenoa has also been a client for a period of time. So like we have just really crossed paths, and I love her to death. You're really going to enjoy her story. She is an open book, very vulnerable and very open. Chenoa is a musician, and she's also a musician educator. She's going to tell you a little bit more about who she is and what she does. Chenoa, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Sade. It's good to be here, and like you just said, we do go back, back a ways, and it's just awesome to see your growth and um, where you are now. So I'm thrilled to be with you in this capacity. I'm Chenoa Murphy. I am a musician. I play the violin, and I'm also an educator. I currently teach online classes about Black classical composers and musicians, as well as diversity workshops to different music organizations such as the Suzuki organizations across the country and abroad. So it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Welcome, welcome. And you mentioned that you teach the Suzuki method. And I remember
Yeah.
our failed attempt to get my son
Yep.
to play the
But it's difficult to teach online, especially beginners. There
violin.
really needs to be a hands-on approach, with beginners. So I don't.
I
It's
don't think
it,
that
it
was it,
is what it
Chenoa.
is.
My kid is my kid. It's all right.
Okay. Yeah, he gave it a good try though.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, I love that you're in my life and you've been in my life in so many capacities. But today we're here to talk about the fact that you are newly remarried.
Yes.
Like, how long have
Uh,
you been remarried now? A year?
no, not even a year. Victor and I got married March 24th, 2021.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Yeah,
congratulations. Like I thought
thank you.
Kent and I were newlyweds because we're going
Uh-huh.
on 3 years now, but
Uh-huh.
now you've taken over the baton. And
Yep.
I love your story. I know your divorce story, your childhood story. You really are the poster child for childhood trauma. A lot of divorces are fueled by religious thinking that has come
Mm,
into kind of like relationships being fueled by like weird ideas around relationships, and I know that impacted you in your first marriage. And
yes.
so I
Very
mean
strong.
I want us to take our time a little bit here to kind of tell your story a little bit about your
Sure.
your childhood and your religious background, how that impacted your first marriage and your divorce. So I'll just let you take the floor and tell all the ladies what happened.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in the Church of God in Christ, which is one of the largest African American denominations, both here in the United States and around the world. So you couldn't tell me nothing. I was proud to be Kojic, as we called ourselves, and I just remember receiving messages about relationships, and there were a lot of don'ts.
Mm,
There were a lot of, boys or men, the only purpose was for marriage. There was no dating. There was, casual dating was a no-no. This was also during the purity culture, so it wasn't just in the African American church, but also in the white church. And so you had books such as I Kissed Dating Goodbye. He has
mhm.
since renounced him, all of that, but
Yes.
that was one of the books that I read. I Kissed Dating Goodbye, as well as there's another lady who was really big in the purity movement that I cannot recall at the moment, but I just remember reading all of these books about how to be the proper Christian wife, And this is information that I was taking in as young as 15 years old. You know, I
Yes.
remember as when I was 15 and making the decision, you know, since I could not just be friends with the boy or friends with the guy, then, you know, I just was like, well, okay, I'll do what God wants me to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
will, you know, preserve my virginity for marriage or preserve myself for marriage, which is what I did do. But it was just kind of that thing you meet somebody and you just immediately start thinking, okay, is this the one? Because I didn't want to get my heart involved unless I felt like
Mm-hmm.
God was telling me this was the person. And that was another thing that I was taught is that God tells you or shows you who the person is. He tells you who to marry. And so that's what I believed at the time. Then, on top of that, in terms of my childhood, in terms of abuse, I would say that the heaviest or the areas were emotional, mental, and verbal abuse. And I know a lot of people um, don't place a lot of emphasis on those particular areas. There tends to be, I don't know if it's necessarily more emphasis, but there's the notion that abuse isn't abuse unless it's sexual or unless it's physical, unless it's
Mm-hmm.
something that you can physically see a bruise, you know. But for me, you know, emotional, mental, and verbal abuse was just as devastating for me, just as I just recall leaving at age 18 for college, just very
Mm.
broken, self-esteem just shattered, very low self-worth. My spirit, you know, was broken. And so, yeah, marriage was just the thing that I wanted to accomplish, and I wanted to do it God's way or what I thought was God's way.
Yeah, and I definitely relate to that because my family was more nominal Christian where they weren't practicing, but I became a born again Christian right around 13,
Mhm.
14. And marriage was
Same
very
here.
much
Mhm.
presented as sort of like the promised land.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely. Yep.
yep,
Like
that as
one
a
of those
woman,
huge milestones that you just
mhm,
meet. It kind of increases your value. It kind of gives you worth. You know, I would not have put it in those words back then, but
mhm.
now that I think about it, that is how I felt. You know, that I wasn't worthy or even valuable as a female or as a young woman unless someone wanted my hand in marriage.
Yeah, yeah. And then after that, then living up to the Proverbs 31 woman standard,
Oh yeah.
which is
Hmm.
it's interesting that the actual application of the Proverbs 31 woman is and it's like a layer of interpretation on what Proverbs 31 actually says.
Right.
Because you know
Mm,
that woman was not a stay-at-home mom.
right. Exactly. She had many businesses and servants, and you know, her husband was known in the field or in the courts or whatever it says. But yeah, she wasn't the one doing all the work.
Yes, yes. And the other thing I found out, this is after my divorce, when I went back and said, okay, what's really going on here? And I started doing a lot of reading and even reading the Bible, like what checking what was taught to me,
Hmm.
was that the book of Proverbs is actually one book written to
Hmm.
one person,
Hmm.
right? Proverbs 31 wasn't written to women. The
No.
entire book was written to David's son. And
Hmm.
the premise or the purpose of the book was to teach a man how to live Proverbs 1 through 30
Yes.
and then choose a spouse. But
Hmm.
it's interesting that like that's been weaponized against women to say you have
Absolutely.
to live up to
Oh
this one chapter, but the
yeah.
first 30
Hmm.
chapters that are written to the man, and I say the man because you know there's a lot in the first 30 chapters that a woman can live by too, but the purpose of the book originally was to teach men how to be. And so
Exactly.
my takeaway from that, like rereading and reorienting myself as a full human in the world after
Mm,
my divorce, was that
right.
wait a second, if I am trying to live at the highest standard, then I need to be looking at the man that I'm dating and saying, hey, are you living Proverbs 1 through 30? Do you look like a Proverbs 1 through 30 man? Which I had been in the church 30 years and never heard that said, never heard that addressed, that, hey, you don't get a Proverbs 31 woman unless you're a Proverbs 1 through 30 man. So I definitely, you know, a lot of what you're talking about, I really had to sit with after my own divorce as well. So do you think all of that, like kind of where you were at that point with just having so much anxiety around, can I pick the right person? The low self-esteem, did that impact who you then chose as your husband the first time?
I believe so. And I just remember the woman's name. Her name was Elizabeth Elliot. She wrote a lot of books
Oh,
on purity and all that. So anyway, I just wanted
it's
to
interesting that you
suggest
mentioned
that.
Elizabeth Elliot. I know what she's written about purity, but I also use her as an example of a woman who's like, listen, I'm gonna have me a husband. And every
Yes,
time one of our husbands died, she found another one. And I
she
tell
sure
my Christian
did.
ladies, listen, if Elizabeth Elliot could find a husband anytime she wanted one, you
Yep,
can find one. I promise you can find
exactly.
one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to answer your question, I do believe that my choice in my first husband um, had a lot to do with how I was feeling about myself.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about it is that he was on the outside, he had it going on. You know, he had just graduated with his master's degree, had admission to get his doctorate at the University of Iowa. So I followed him there and even had gone back to school myself towards my doctorate degree. So he was very ambitious, was a Christian, you know, handsome, kind of a go-getter, you know, so he kind of checked off the things that I thought was appealing or appropriate, or, you know, he was honorable to my parents, you know, the whole nine. But it wasn't until after, um, you know, he said the I do's that the emotional and mental stuff, you know, kind of came to the top. And he was very, what I know now to be narcissistic. And it was just
Mm-hmm.
basically, um, you know, just all about him. And, you know, and then on top of that, there were cultural differences, him being Yoruba Nigerian.
Mm-hmm.
I
That's my
just
tribe.
didn't, right. I just didn't think that those things mattered. I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
just, and going back to what you said about the pressure, you know, I did feel tremendous pressure to make the right choice, you know, because there was
Mm-hmm.
this whole notion of there's the perfect will of God, there's the permissive will of God,
Oh
or
my
permissible,
God.
however you say it, will of God, and then, you know, you're out of the will of God. And so there was this whole pressure of,
And
you
if you're
know,
out of the
whoever
will
you
of
married,
God, like
yeah,
that's
then
the
that's
end for
it.
you.
Exactly, that's it. It, you know, your whole destiny or life's purpose is just off track, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there were stories of or at least testimonies of people saying, you know, God can redirect you and put you back, you know, it was just all about. And then if you come from a home that emphasized perfection, knowingly or unknowingly, it just was a recipe for disaster. I just really felt like
Mm-hmm.
I had to choose the perfect person, you know.
And
And
I
then I
know
leaned so.
that's what
Mhm.
when we worked together, you had a lot of anxiety
Yes,
that had sort of the aftermath of that after your divorce, just because of all the
yes,
perfectionistic thinking. Do you want to talk a little bit
yes.
about that?
Yeah, I realized that, you know, I remember when I first met my children's father, my first husband, and experiencing symptoms that I thought mimicked having a heart attack. You know,
Mm,
there was a lot of pressure in my chest, a lot of strain and stress down my left arm. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, am I having a heart attack? And, you know, now I realize that it was anxiety. And then there was the intrusive thoughts in the loop thinking, you know, Is he the person? Is he the person? Not trusting myself, not finding anything wrong, but because I didn't find anything wrong, there could be something wrong because I was also taught that he can show up as a gosh, not a fake, but what's the word?
A wolf in
Oh,
sheep's clothing,
yeah, like
or
a wolf
yeah.
in sheep's clothing, you know. So in other words, just any indication that, you know, you can't trust yourself, shouldn't trust yourself. And then I felt like I
Mm.
really wasn't getting any answers from God. So then I leaned on my pastor at the time who had a prophetic gift. And so he said he's the one. And
So it's
yeah,
it's it's
so
so interesting that the teachings caused you not to be able to question yourself so much you couldn't even get your own answer as an adult. And
exactly.
so then basically somebody else had to choose, which happens a
Oh,
lot.
absolutely. Oh yeah. It was all about making sure that you run things by your pastor or whoever your spiritual authority figure is, you know, at the time. And so, you know, you're told all the time just throughout church that you shouldn't trust yourself. Don't trust anything, you know, in your flesh. And
Mhm. And that
yeah,
really infantilizes people. It's
yes,
almost like you're an
absolutely.
adult, but you can't function as an adult. You need this other
Right.
person to tell you what to literally tell you who to marry.
Absolutely. Tell you what to do, or at least guide you along the way. And like I said, I talked to my pastor about him and he gave me the okay. So I figured it was
Mhm.
okay, you know, especially since he called himself a prophet and had a prophetic gift, um, you know,
It would
which,
be interesting to go back to the pastors who all gave, these
oh,
marriages a
he's not
check
even,
mark.
the last time he and I talked, he's not even married to his own wife
Oh,
anymore. And that just made me so mad. But anyway,
yeah.
that's a whole
And
nother
it is a
story.
message that I think is important. A lot of women after divorce are like, I don't even know who I am anymore. And this is why. It's
Yeah.
because for a lot of that period, sometimes as a young person, sometimes during the marriage, you weren't operating in who you were. You
Is
weren't
that
practicing
right?
and solidifying your own personal identity, your own likes, dislikes, wants, all of those things. And
Exactly.
that's why
Because
you don't
none of
know who
those
you are
things
after.
mattered. Yeah,
Yeah.
because none of those things mattered. It was only what God wanted for you. Only what
Yeah.
He, you know, and anything that was appealing to you as a woman had to be wrong because God doesn't want you to do
Yeah.
anything in the flesh. It's only in the spirit, you know.
Yes.
Um,
All
so
right.
yeah,
So
I
how did you do it
realized.
different the
Oh,
second time? So now we have a snapshot of like what happened the first time. We know that didn't work.
right, right,
And so the
right.
second time around,
Excuse me.
how did you meet Victor?
We met on Facebook. We were Facebook friends, and you know, we would communicate here and there through direct message. You know, nothing heavy, nothing serious, but just
And he was a
you
musician
know,
too. Like, was that kind of
yes,
the original connection?
yes, he's a musician, and so he would send me clips of his music. Um, and so, like I said, just no big deal. Plus, he um, is Scottish, so he has white skin. So I really wasn't, you know, paying that much.
Oh, well, I think you need to elaborate what was happening with you at that time concerning the like race, how you thought about race. It,
Well, well, I would just say, you know, white men just did not appeal to me. Just was not my preference. You know,
right.
I didn't necessarily have anything against them, just
Mm-hmm.
not my
But you
preference.
figured your next person was gonna be black too, like just assumed.
Yeah, I did definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that never crossed my mind that he wouldn't be. You know,
Yeah.
um, but let's see, Victor. So we just started talking, and he was going through something, you know, kind of serious in his life and needed my advice or wanted my wisdom on it. And I remember thinking, uh-oh, this is where people, you know, catch feelings and all of that, you know. So I made sure that my walls were up and that I was, level-headed and sober, but then he started saying things or talking to me about things that were just really hitting my heart and just really
Mm-hmm.
resonating with me. And I began to realize that we had more in common than I, assumed just based on his outward, appearance. Now, mind you, he's
Mm-hmm.
very handsome. I think he's very handsome. But like I said, just the cultural differences and skin differences,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was just ready to overlook. But the more we talked and the more we, um, yeah, just the more we talked, I just remember thinking, oh no, I'm actually
I'm actually,
falling for this
I really
guy.
like this guy.
Yeah, like he really is somebody, that I could see myself with, you know. And then I just began to see, I had another thing from my up spiritual or Christian upbringing was signs,
Mm.
asking God for signs or asking God for confirmation. So this time around, I just said that I was going to use my own brain and common sense and really invest in self-care and whatnot. So fast forward to having met Victor and feeling myself falling for him, I just began to see all of these signs. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous, how I would, he's from Scotland. And so I would hear bagpipes or I would see a man literally like walking down the street in a kilt. Or, I remember going to, I was taking my daughter because she's a visual artist and taking her to the museum, and these kids have written essays about when their families, sorry, where their families came from before they moved here to Springfield, Illinois, which is where I live. And I walked up to one. Now, mind you, just one essay, and this child had written that his family came here from Scotland. So it was all of these different signs, you know, and on top of that, just who he was as a person or who he is as a person just all kind of started to
Yeah.
come together. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
It's
I was able
interesting.
to use my mind, and my
Yes.
brain to
You
make a real
trusted
choice.
yourself. You were like, oh, no, no,
Yeah.
this is me. This is, you know, my experience and my thinking is
Hmm.
valuable. I think that's the difference is
Oh,
your initial
yeah.
experience, you devalued or were taught to devalue your own thinking, your own thoughts, your own
Absolutely.
feelings,
Yeah.
your own likes,
Hmm.
dislikes, and direction. And this
Yeah.
time you were like, wait a second, I matter. What I think
Yeah.
matters.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I still had a ways to go in terms of healing the anxiety because I hadn't known that I had relationship anxiety until,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, until I met Victor. And I remember those same feelings coming up that I had with my first husband. And that's when I began to really pay more attention to the anxiety part because I thought I was having anxiety with my first husband because of my experience with Black men or just,
Mm-hmm.
but here is a white skinned man, and I was still having those same, um, experiencing those same sensations, just anxiety, intense, almost like a panic attack. And then I began to do deeper research on what that is. And so that was a
Mm-hmm.
whole nother, I guess, layer of healing, that needed to take place, feeling, believing that love is safe, believing
Mm-hmm.
that being in a relationship is safe. Because
Yes.
again, there was so much hinged on, the dangers of men or the dangers of, getting too close to a man or, just all these danger messages,
Right. And
that
you'd been
are taught in
programmed
the
that
church.
it was all
Yeah,
dangerous.
absolutely.
Men were
Absolutely.
dangerous, relationships were
Hmm.
dangerous. If you didn't get it right in the
Yep.
middle, you were going to be in
Yep.
danger. And, you know,
Absolutely.
that's a lot to work through. That's a lot to do, especially if it's been programmed into you and drilled into you. You can't
Yes.
just shake that stuff off. Like it doesn't happen
No.
that way.
Mm-mm. No, not at all. So things are a lot better in that regard. And, thanks to you as well as other resources about thoughts, thoughts are just
Hmm.
thoughts. They don't have any real meaning unless I give them, meaning. And so do I still have the what ifs? And even now after marriage, I every
Hmm.
now and then I'll still have a what if, I didn't choose the right person, or what if this and what if that. I just kind of let them
Just let them float
slide.
by.
Yeah, let them slide, and then I notice that they have less and less power, and they come up less and less. So
That's incredible. That is such good
yeah.
work, Chenoa. Way to go.
Thank you, thank
Way
you.
to go. I
Yeah, but
wanted
they
to
don't talk
highlight,
about these things though.
well, I think a lot of
The
that is
church,
because
at least.
one, we don't even know. Like we're having a certain experience. And if you're in an
Hmm.
environment that doesn't mirror or name your experience to you, you just think it's just
Exactly.
you,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
I had a really strong inner critic, shame-based voice in my head, in my
Yes.
childhood and in my first marriage. And I didn't even know what that was
Uh-huh.
until I got into therapy and coaching after my divorce. So you're talking 39, 40, 41 before
Yes.
I realized that that moment where something would happen and I would just have a shame spiral in my body and
Mm-hmm.
this loop of what's wrong with you? There's something like, why would you do that? Like it would just loop in my brain. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was just me. I
Hmm.
had no idea that no, that's trauma talking in your head. You need some
Right.
help.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is why I love the internet. I know there's a lot that's on the internet that is terrible, but I love the
Mm-hmm.
fact that people are, coming out and having a voice and saying, hey, this happened to me. And then other people can go, oh my God, me too. Right.
Exactly.
And that's
Yes.
one of the reasons I have this podcast is so that divorced women have a place where they can tell these stories, where those who have been through the journey and gotten to the other side of dating and getting married again can tell the others, like, listen, there are good men out there. And I love
Absolutely.
your example. There were two things that you did, because I know you're not a coach, so I know you may not look at your journey and say, oh yeah, I did that. Like I know a lot of people look at remarriage stories and they think, oh, that person just got lucky, and they don't know what to do in their own lives to create that story for themselves. And so I wanted to really just highlight a couple of things that you did that I think created your love story for you. One was you expressed your authentic self wherever you are. And that's something that you do as a person. We were just talking about this before starting to record, that like whatever you're thinking and feeling and whatever you're doing, you just put it on Facebook or you talk about it when you're in conversation. And because I'll talk to clients and they'll be like, well, I don't know how to meet a guy on Facebook. Well, you didn't set out to meet a guy on Facebook. You just were on Facebook being yourself, sharing your truth,
Right.
which I know you've done in so many ways. You've done podcasts, you do Facebook Lives, and you're not doing it for business. You're just doing it to share what's on your mind. And I know when something inspires you, you come on and you share about it or you post about it. Like
Yes.
literally for everyone listening, Chenoa is just herself wherever she goes. And the
Thank
fact that she put
you.
her music out there and she talked about her music and what inspired her caught Victor's eye on Facebook. And I
Yes.
think you're the third person that I've worked with who's met someone just being casual friends on Facebook, but being yourself so that whatever it is that was attractive to that person caught their eye. And the other
Yes.
thing you mentioned was seeing signs everywhere. And I wanted to highlight the psychology behind that, because a lot of people listening are thinking there are no good men in my city, no good men in my state, no good men in my world. But what happens is when you get interested in a Scottish guy, your brain is primed to locate everything Scottish in your
Yep.
environment.
Yep. And
It just
even to this
opens up those
day,
things. Yeah.
yeah, even to this day, I still see his name, even his first name or our
Mm-hmm.
last name, somewhere at least once a day. At least
Yes, yes.
to this day, I still, you know, see it. And I don't necessarily look for it. It
Mm.
just,
It's like when you buy a car. When you buy a
yeah,
car, you see that car everywhere, but the same number of cars had always been out there. I mean, so for those of you listening, if you're still dating, you're still not sure you could find someone, the reason you don't see a lot of those guys out there is because you think they don't exist. So your brain is like, oh, they don't exist, so it doesn't find them. For some of you, your brain is preoccupied with your ex or people like your ex. You're still in the stage of like a lot, narcissists are everywhere. So then guess what you find? Narcissists everywhere. And I'm not saying there are not narcissists in the world, okay? I see them too. But do you know how to prime your brain to find what you want? To actually find the good men? Like I will send my clients on a scavenger hunt to find good men. I'll be like, we'll write out some characteristics that we're looking for. I'm like, go find this. They might be married or they might be old or whatever, but these men do exist in the world. And once you start finding them, you're more likely to find your person. So I just wanted to kind of like highlight those things in your journey, because it's really important for us to know that there is a psychology behind why things are happening. There's a mindset behind why you found your person or not found your person yet. And it's just really good to know, well, if I haven't found my person, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you got to fix the mindset. Maybe you need to get coaching, maybe it's therapy, whatever it is, to be able to move to the next step.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
all right.
good.
Sorry, I know I interrupted your story to like
that's
highlight
okay.
that.
I appreciate that, because sometimes when you're in it, you don't really know. It just happened, but it's interesting that you mentioned, what did catch his eye. And just like you said, I was in a journey where, this was around a lot of just, shooting deaths and things were happening to unarmed, Black men, young men. And so I would just talk about it, on Facebook. And Victor would respond. He would comment as if he had a shared experience. And I knew that he had white skin. I knew that he was in Scotland. So I was like, how does this man know? Like he was just able to verbalize, or just the way he would phrase things would almost make it sound like he was part of the Black community too. And I was like, I would tell my girlfriends at the time, like, we have an ally, all the way in Scotland. And I remember saying, and he's cute too, but that he tells me to this day that is what got his attention, because he, just growing up the way he did, he could relate to the struggles of the Black community here in the States, and how he just felt like there was a shared relationship, or just I don't know what the
because
word
I think
is,
if I
just a
remember
connection.
where he grew up, certain portions of the white population were treated
Absolutely
the same way. Not exactly
the
the same,
same
because there was
way.
not a slave history, but the
Right.
brutality,
Yeah,
poverty,
police
all of that.
brutality, inner city, drugs, alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
just having those messages that you're not going to amount to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then also there was the religious war between Catholicism and Protestants, and having grown up, being raised Catholic, it was a fight for your life, walking down the street if people knew you were Catholic, getting a job if they knew you were Catholic. I mean, just a lot of similarities, even to the point where, some phrases, that Glaswegian women make, or getting bread, skipping the very top um, slice of bread, and just quite a few cultural similarities that I found that we share as well. That was really shocking, because again, just messages that we receive about groups of people and what we believe about other groups of people. I was just pleasantly surprised to find out that he and I really do have a lot more in common, even culturally, than I realized.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about how you went from starting to date to getting married? Because you guys had to navigate a long distance relationship.
Oh, Gosh, we just set a schedule to visit each other every 3 to 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Finances would allow it, but we pretty much did that since, let's see, we met in 2018, and then I went to visit him first. He flew me out, and then it was just kind of about every 3 to 4 months we would visit each other, and then it just got to a point where we didn't want to wait anymore.
Yeah.
Or we just knew that, our children were starting to meet. He has 4 girls. I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. And I don't know. We've always remained, prayerful and just kind of going by our instincts on things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
How
I
did you
can't really.
know? What is it about him that made him? Because I know a lot of ladies also like this is the sticking point for them is like, well, how do I know that this person is safe? Especially after a divorce, it's like, I don't want to marry someone who's going to
Oh
hurt me again.
yeah, right.
And I love to highlight like just the because the outward signs that we were given when we were younger, like someone ambitious and someone who can pay the bills and all of those
Yeah,
things obviously are not what um always matter, right? Like
right,
money matters, but that's not the only thing. So what were the
right.
things about Victor that let you know that he was a safe person and he was going to be safe for you and safe for your kids?
His First of all, his kindness.
I love
He is
that.
the kindest man, really human being that I've ever met. And then his willingness to work through problems,
Mm,
and I would say that he has a PhD in emotional intelligence. His level of emotional intelligence is so high. And like I said, nothing puts him off or nothing scares him in terms of problems or
mm.
issues, or and it's like he knows what to say, he knows what to do. um and he's not perfect, but it just the way we were able to work through things
Yeah.
just
And I love
really
that you
let me
said
know.
kindness because you
Yeah,
can't fake kindness. You can
exactly.
fake generosity, and a lot of narcissists will. They'll spend like big money, but you cannot fake
Mhm.
empathizing with what a person is going through,
Exactly.
and
That.
just really going out of your way to be there for the person in a way that makes
Yeah.
a difference.
Exactly, that
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
And
So
then
good.
also just how I felt when I would be around him.
Mm-hmm.
There would just be this peace, or just this calm,
Mm.
that I would just experience each and every time that I was around him. And then I noticed too that, my femininity would just kind of increase. I would want to cook, or I would want to decorate, or I would,
Yeah. You were
I mean, I'm
nesting,
not gonna.
Chenoa.
I mean, I know those things might not necessarily be feminine, because I know men are in those areas as well, professional wise. But I don't know, just how I felt
Mm-hmm.
when I was around him, just very grounded and very, like I said, calm and peaceful, and just just in it to win, in it for the long haul.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really so happy for you guys. And I got to be at your
Yeah,
little virtual bachelorette, which was so
yes,
fun. And I've
yes,
just been
thank
so
you.
proud and happy to be it's a little part of your story and
Thank
to be your
you. I
friend.
appreciate it.
For the women who are listening, who are divorced, still single, trying to figure out this dating thing, some of them trying to decide, do I even want to try it again? And some who are trying to decide, do I want a coach, right? Or do I want to, do I even need support? Maybe I can just wing it.
Mhm.
What's your advice in any of those areas that you'd like to give the listeners?
Well, first of all, I want to say I understand, because I had written off marriage. I had said, you know what, it's just going to be me and the kids. That's going to be my main focus. Um, And so that's what I set out to do. Just I was literally prepared to be single, single mom for the rest of my life. And he has the same story. Victor was prepared to be a single dad, for the rest of his life. But I just I just decided to give him a chance, and to, I had done my own work in terms of, inner work and whatnot. I had
And
gone to
you did quite a
therapy.
bit of work. I want to
I
highlight that. Even
did.
before you worked
Thank
with me,
you.
you had already worked with a
Yes,
couple of coaches, you'd taken
yes. I had gone to
courses, gone to
therapy.
therapy. Like I was the
Yeah,
tail end of this story here.
yeah. But what I liked about you and working with you is I learned on a deeper level about thoughts and thinking. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that I received from you, Sade, is um, the fact that I can change my beliefs at any point. Because beliefs can be changed. It's okay for me to
Mm-hmm.
change my mind. So for ladies out there, if you believe there are no, good men out there, you can change that belief and decide that there are good men out there. Um,
Yes.
so yeah,
I
because
love that.
especially in the church, and I don't know if it's just because of its spiritual beliefs, but they just kind of make it sound like once you believe something, you should just hold on to that belief, for dear life and live by it and die by it
Whether
and
it's
swear
working or
by
not.
it, whether it's working or not. Exactly. But if, you know, I would just suggest that you be, real with yourself, be honest with yourself. Because a lot of times, especially with Black women, I have found that we use a lot of these. There are no good men. I can do bad all by myself. Or I'm just better left alone. 9 times
Mm,
out of 10, I have found them to be ways to cope or ways to, as a defense mechanism to just not be disappointed again,
mm,
which I get, which I understand. But if you really want a man, own up to it and make it um important to you just as if you were looking for a job or going back to school or going
mm-hmm.
to, get an apartment or a house, whatever. We place a lot of importance on those things. We read the books, we, do the research, we do all of these things, for so many other areas of our life. But it seems like with relationships, we're just supposed to know what to do. And it's one of
Mm,
the most important, relationships, or one of the most important things, in our society is what builds a society is relationships and marriage and
yeah.
children. Um, so make sure that if you are saying you don't want someone, that that's really the truth, and if
Mm,
it is the truth and you have peace with it, God bless you, sister. But like I said, I think it's a lot of women out there who are saying that and they're lying to themselves because of disappointment. And
yeah.
if that's the case,
Yeah.
hire a coach. If you need someone to help you work through those layers, you know, there's no harm in that. There's just no harm in a woman wanting to be in a healthy, loving relationship with a man. It's just no shame in that.
100%. Yeah. And
Yeah.
like you said, if you are afraid of being disappointed and then you don't go for it, you're just disappointing
Hmm.
yourself earlier. Like, I'm just going to be disappointed now
Exactly.
instead of
Exactly.
trying and maybe being disappointed later or maybe actually getting what I want. But that's such great
Exactly.
advice, Chenoa. That was so
Thank you.
good.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I know it's
Absolutely.
very vulnerable. Opening, I was like, I'm gonna go all the way to her childhood for this one. So I
Yes,
appreciate you being willing to talk
absolutely.
about all of that. And I know many of the listeners are gonna resonate with your story, are gonna want to know where they can follow you, participate in your music education programs, your diversity programs. Please let us know where we can find you online. If you could spell out maybe your social media handle or your website so that if someone's
Absolutely.
driving, they can look you up later.
Sure. On Facebook, I'm simply Chenoa Murphy, Chenoa. And on Instagram, I am at Black Classical Musicians and the number two. So Black Classical Musicians too.
Wonderful. And we're going to link all of her social media handles and her website in the show notes. Please support this amazing work that she's doing with
Thank
educating the
you.
world about Black classical musicians. And it is
Exactly. And
so
composers. Yeah.
weird that that sounds like, oh, really? Are there? But in
Right.
our history, you actually teach the history
Yes.
of Black classical musicians. And it goes
Absolutely.
way, way, way back,
In
further
the
than people.
1700s, the
Yeah.
1500s, I found a black royal trumpeter who was a musician in King Henry the ninth, one of those numbers, but that's the 1500s.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much
Yeah.
for doing that work. It's powerful work, so
Thank
needed in the
you.
world. Thank you
Yes,
for sharing
thank
your
you.
story.
Thank
Everyone
you.
listening, I appreciate you taking the time to hear Chenoa's story. I hope it was a blessing to you as she's a blessing to me. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you next time.